Welcome to another episode of Too Close to Home, the series where we dig up creepy stories, haunted places and mysteries from our very own Patreons' hometowns. This episode we're looking at Mike, Christine, Daniel, Alice and Justin's hometowns. And do we have some good stories in store for you five? If you want us to dig up stories from your area, head on over to Patreon and join our Too Close to Home tier. Thank you everyone for supporting, and now, as always, hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. Daniel Saenz. Pomona is a city in Los Angeles County, California. It's located in the Pomona Valley and is named after the ancient Roman goddess of fruit. It's also the hometown of one of our patrons, Daniel. For you, Daniel, we're going to look at the old Spadra Cemetery and Phillips Mansion. The Spadra Cemetery was originally part of the sprawling Rancho San Jose land grant, an area where families were sent to try and escape poverty and war. The town of Spadra was officially founded in 1866 and was initially frowned upon by the surrounding communities, but despite the insulting prejudice, the village was soon thriving and it became an important stagecoach stop between Los Angeles and Yuma, Arizona. In 1873, pioneering rancher and developer Louis Phillips signed a contract with the Southern Pacific to build a railway line to Spadra, which further benefited the town. And in 1875, a couple of years later, Phillips built a grand mansion in the town that was befitting for a man of his wealth. As you would expect with a new town, it had its share of drama, which included many mysterious deaths, suicides and murders, and it was soon apparent that a community graveyard was needed, which again Phillips instigated. However, when the railroad line was extended again, it was not deemed necessary to stop at Spadra, and the town soon began to flounder. Eventually in 1964, Spadra was annexed by the neighbouring town of Pomona. Today, industrial buildings stand in the place of the town's original structures, and along with the Phillips Mansion, the cemetery is all that remains of Spadra. The cemetery itself lays hidden down a dirt road behind a locked gate. Many of the graves of the former residents of Spadra, including Louis Phillips himself, have their headstones broken by vandals, and some graves have been cemented over to prevent further damage. The now dilapidated cemetery has a long history of being haunted, and seems many of its residents died either young or in tragic circumstances, if the local obituaries are anything to go by. At night, a male figure has been witnessed walking through the cemetery who appears to melt into one of the headstones. The cemetery is also known to be strangely quiet and still, even though it's under a freeway. But if visitors start disrespecting the graves, a scorching wind picks up out of nowhere that is only felt in the cemetery. It is also not unusual for voices to be heard, rocks to be thrown, or clothing to be pulled by an unseen force. The most common apparitions are that of a mischievous little boy who pulls hair, giggles and plays tricks on visitors, often taking items from them and hiding them around the graveyard, as well as the ghost, known as the Friar, who is a less friendly, bitter old man, who becomes very violent towards those who touch his grave, which incidentally is one of the more predominant graves in the cemetery. Some believe the Friar ghost is violent because he is angry over the vandalism of his final resting place. Sadly, because of the vandalism, nowadays the cemetery is closed to the public, and anyone trying to gain access may be prosecuted. The only reminder of the once bustling town is the foreboding Phillips Mansion. Phillips and his family lived in the mansion until his death in the house in 1900. At the time of his death, Spadra was already in decline, but the Phillips family still remained in the house for many decades. Although by the onset of World War II, the once stately home had been cut up into 4 apartments, and by the 1960s had gone through a succession of owners, and was heavily vandalised and scheduled to be demolished. However, in 1966 it was saved when the Historical Society of Pomona Valley bought it, and it was restored as a museum, only to be severely damaged by earthquakes in 1990 and 2008. Today, it is mostly abandoned, with only the occasional historical tour. For Louis Phillips, both his earthly home and his eternal home in the graveyard have lost their splendour and are largely forgotten. Perhaps that is why his tortured soul is said to still wander between the two places, trying to protect his legacy. This one's for you, Alice. Alice grew up in West Hampstead, in London, UK. She now lives in Kingston upon Thames, Surrey. So for Alice, we're going to look at both areas. West Hampstead is near the infamous Hampstead Heath. The Heath has long had the reputation as being haunted by a variety of spirits and legends. Back in the day, the Hampstead area was very popular with highwaymen who for centuries preyed on wealthy travellers on their way to London. But when they were caught, they were usually strung up in the trees on the Heath and left there dangling until their skin cracked in the sun. Notable highwaymen such as Claude Duval and Francis Jackson were hanged on the Heath, and other unfortunate souls have been hanged on the Heath for much lesser crimes. For example, in 1746, after the Battle of Culloden, a Highland bagpiper named Jimmy Reed was charged for playing an instrument of war and insurrection on the Heath land. The court threw out his defence that bagpipes were a musical instrument rather than an instrument of war, and he was hanged. However, perhaps the most notable Hampstead resident was Dick Turpin, who, although didn't hang on the Heath, was said to be born in the Spaniards Inn and used the pub as a hideout to plan his highway robberies. His father was the pub's landlord, and Dick's gun was said to be fired nightly as the closing time signal. To this day, the upstairs room at the pub, believed to have been his childhood bedroom, is named the Turpin Bar in his honour, and is believed to be haunted by his ghost. Over the years, the Heath has been the scene of some tragic deaths, some by suicide and others by murder, so it's no surprise that the Heath is riddled with tales of ghost sightings. These include Headless Horseman, a female ghost dressed in Victorian clothes, as well as the spectres of men hanging from the trees. There is no doubt the Hampstead Heath is a creepy place, even though it's in the middle of London, and it is a brave person who would venture out there after dark. But if that wasn't enough for Alice, it seems she moved from one spooky place to another. As Kingston upon Thames is absolutely teeming with ghosts, so many in fact, we could only choose a couple. Kingston's market was the location of the county jail and the site of many hangings. Back in the day, the marketplace was not a nice area, and was the scene of many murders and executions. In 1681, it is said that a woman came to Kingston to seek spiritual sanctification, but the locals were suspicious of her intentions and branded her a witch. She was burned at the stake, suffering the most horrific death. As she was dying, she cursed the town to be a part of various wars and misery in the future. The spiritual lady is not the only woman to haunt the square though. Many have witnessed an old lady with a dog standing on the road near the area. She is said to ask motorists for a lift before disappearing. After the altercation, those who refuse her request experience an array of strange paranormal happenings. Another ghost is said to be that of Edward James Muggeridge, a photographer and early motion picture pioneer who was born in Kingston, and whose talent took him to America. However, after he discovered his beloved wife was having an affair, he murdered her lover, although he got away with the crime on the grounds of justifiable homicide. Today, many of his photographs are displayed in the Kingston Museum, along with several of his papers and artifacts, but it seems his spirit also hung around, and staff at the museum often hear footsteps when the museum is empty, usually around the place where his photographs hang. The Crown Liquor Saloon. This one's for you, Christine. Christine Caldwell works for the NHS as a healthcare worker at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Christine is also one of our incredibly valued patrons, so this next one is for Christine and all the healthcare workers around the world who have and are working so incredibly hard to help us through the COVID-19 pandemic. Belfast is an extraordinary place and has had its fair share of highs and lows over the years. It's probably best known for the Harland and Wolff shipyard, that in the late 1800s built the majority of the ocean liners for the White Star Line, including the Titanic. However, we aren't going to focus on the Titanic for Christine. Instead, we're going to look at a pub that is located just a 3 minutes walk away from the hospital she works at. The Crown Liquor Saloon, also known as the Crown Bar, is one of Belfast's most famous bars, and renowned for its extravagant Victorian Gothic interior. It is also one of the most bombed buildings in Belfast, and suffered badly through the civil commotion and terrorist bombings that swept through the city during the Troubles. And it was witness to some of the worst violence in Northern Ireland's bloody past. Its colourful windows were regularly reduced to smithereens as the drinkers inside drank on. The former Gin Palace was built in 1826 and was opened by Felix O'Hanlon, who originally called it the Railway Tavern. The pub was later bought by Michael Flanagan, and it was his son Patrick who renamed and renovated it. Patrick had acquired a taste for the flamboyant after a trip to Europe. It's viewed as a priceless gem of Victoriana and viewed by many as one of the great bars of the world. The interior is an architectural riot with lavish colours and embellishments that have been described as pleasantly gaudy, even a little creepy. Today it is owned by the National Trust and is fully restored to its original period. Along with the Titanic Museum, it's one of Belfast's top tourist attractions and is one of the most Instagrammed landmarks in the UK. It has also been visited by notable people such as Brad Pitt, as well as Prince Harry and Meghan. As you would expect with such a checkered past, it has a couple of resident ghosts. It is said to be haunted by the ghost of previous landlord Michael Flanagan, one of its original owners, and Amelia, a former prostitute who allegedly fell down the stairs in the bar and broke her neck. Both spirits have been contacted during a seance performed by paranormal investigator Michael Hirons, and both visitors and staff at the pub have felt their presence. We'd love to know if you've ever been Christine and experienced anything strange. Now, we thought we'd include a bonus story about the Royal Victoria Hospital where you work. We couldn't find anything creepy about it, but we did find an inspirational story that led to saving many lives. It began in 2005 when Daniel Lavery from Devon in England was visiting his family in Northern Ireland with his wife Shelley. At the time, she was pregnant with their youngest child. During their visit, Shelley fell unconscious and was rushed to the Royal Victoria Hospital, where she was diagnosed with placenta previa accreta, a serious condition that put her life in danger. Shelley was given an emergency cesarean but bled badly. She was so unwell that she was given the last rites by a priest, and Daniel was told to prepare for the worst. While medics battled away in the hospital to save Shelley's life, Daniel stepped outside into the cold and saw a motorcyclist climb from his motorbike, carrying a bag marked blood. Daniel followed the man to reception, where he heard the stranger say the donation was for Shelley. Daniel watched as the bag carrying life-saving blood was rushed to his wife. He then turned to thank the stranger for his help, but the man had gone. Thankfully, Shelley and her new child, a baby boy, survived their ordeal, and Daniel vowed he would spend his life repaying the kindness and help of the blood bike stranger. He was never able to find out who he was, but Daniel went on to set up Devon Freewheelers, an emergency voluntary service comprising of a team of volunteer riders, drivers, call handlers and fundraisers, who are dedicated to providing a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week service, supporting the NHS in delivering essential blood and other medical supplies and equipment to hospitals and other NHS establishments and patients throughout Devon. The Spotted Lake in Osoyoos. This one's for you, Justin Doucette. Osoyoos is a town in British Columbia, Canada, right on the Canadian-US border. It's located in an area of outstanding natural beauty and is surrounded by desert, vineyards and mountains, and our patron Justin is lucky enough to live there. For Justin, we're looking at one of the natural wonders of the world that is just on his doorstep, the Spotted Lake. The Spotted Lake is located just northwest of Osoyoos in the Okanagan Valley. It's a body of water that in spring and winter looks just like any other lake. But in the summer, when most of the water starts to evaporate, it takes on a whole new look. And hundreds of huge briny pools are left behind, leaving a polka-dotted landscape of yellow, green and blue spots. The phenomenon has dubbed the area the most magical place in Canada. The colourful pools are the result of high concentration of minerals, including calcium, sodium sulfates and magnesium sulfate, that have accumulated in the water after running off the surrounding hills. The colours depend on the concentration of minerals in each pool. So unique is this phenomena that Spotted Lake has for centuries been considered a sacred place by the indigenous people. They believe that each of the different circles had different healing and medicinal properties. During World War I, minerals from the lake were used to manufacture ammunition. The minerals were harvested by labourers who mined as much as 1 ton of salt from the lake each day. The mineral mining diminished some of the more vibrant colours that used to be displayed on the lake, although it still remains an impressive sight. The land that surrounds the water was privately owned for many years, but in 2001 was acquired for the benefit and use of the Okanagan Nation. The purchase ensured that the land would be protected from development and preserve it as a cultural and environmental site. What an incredible natural phenomenon. Now, we couldn't find many ghosts in the vicinity of Justin's hometown, but what we did find not too far away was a ghost town. It's a place called Molson, located just below the Canadian border in Washington. It is an old, abandoned mining town that was thriving until an arrogant farmer decided to declare it belonged to his homestead and slung everyone out. Molson was founded back in 1900, and in just a year, the population rose. The town had a newspaper, stores, a doctor, a saloon, and even a hotel. However, this newfound success didn't last long, and by 1901, the mines were failing and the population fell to just 12 people. Things looked up again in 1905, with news of a railroad being built, and the population again shot up and thrived. But by 1909, a local farmer filed for a homestead that included most of the area of the town. And by 1909, he published an official notice that everyone was trespassing and had to leave. Residents were forced to vacate all the buildings and they were left abandoned. Over 100 years on, the area remains preserved as a creepy open-air museum that you can walk around and explore. Many of the original buildings have been restored and contain artifacts from the old community. Some of the buildings are being reclaimed by nature, which just adds to the eeriness of the place. The old store, bar and other buildings can be explored and offer a reminder of another life. The old Molson Cemetery is probably the creepiest place, and although we couldn't find any tales of hauntings, there's sure to be some restless soul buried in those graves. Have you ever been to Molson, Justin? And if so, what was it like? We'd love to explore an abandoned town ourselves. The haunted Dole Mansion. Crystal Lake is a city in Illinois and is the largest in McHenry County. It also happens to be the home of Mike Werning, one of our valued patrons. So this one is for you, Mike. We hope you enjoy it. Back in the 1860s, when Crystal Lake was in its infancy, a wealthy businessman named Charles S. Dole purchased over 1,000 acres of land overlooking the lake, where he constructed an elaborate estate that included a 3-story mansion with adjoining gardens and stables. The house was adorned with the best money could buy at the time, and included fancy archways, carved interior woodwork using black walnut trees grown on the property, as well as a luxurious handcrafted parquet floor and several marble fireplaces. The estimated cost of the construction was around $100,000, a huge amount of money in those days. The estate was known as Lakeland Farm, and Dole lived there with his wife Julia, his mother-in-law Harriet Coffin, and his 2 daughters, Mary Florence, Harriet, and son Sidney. Over the years, Dole spent his enormous wealth on extravagant entertaining, and at one point even purchased racehorses and installed a racetrack on the property. The Doles lived in the mansion until the late 1890s, when the property was sold to his son-in-law for $1. During the early 1900s, the property was owned and operated by several different ice companies, until the advent of refrigeration brought about the decline of the ice business. After lying vacant for several years, the property was sold in 1922 to the Lake Development Company, and today it's owned by the Lakeside Legacy and is one of Crystal Lake's oldest landmarks. However, it is also reputed to be one of the most haunted buildings in the area, and both visitors and workers alike have had their fair share of spooky encounters. One security worker at the mansion claimed he saw a dark shadow running from one side of one of the rooms to the other late one afternoon. He said it definitely was not a person. The same worker also had several personal experiences of seeing flashes of images that he couldn't explain. Visitors to the house have reportedly seen a girl dressed in old clothing running up the staircase. Some believe this to be the spirit of Eliza Ringling, the widow of circus owner Al Ringling, who helped purchase the doll property in the 1920s. Over the years, many stories about apparitions and strange happenings have been witnessed at the home, but one of the most convincing was caught on camera. It was captured by mistake by a doll intern. A wayward bird had found its way into the building and was found dead on the bed in Mrs. Doll's bedroom on the second floor. The intern took a photo of it and uploaded it to her Facebook. Her Facebook friends commented on the picture and asked who was the person standing in the window. The intern hadn't noticed the man at first until she received the comments. She reprinted the photograph and lightened it to get a clearer view. Another picture caught an unexplained image reflecting in the mirror in the doll dining room. An outside shot of the building also shows one of the orbs that seem to plague photographs taken in and around the area, and that some people believe represent paranormal energy. What do you think? The only person known to have died inside the property is Mrs. Doll's mother, apparently named Harriet Coffin. Is it her who haunts the property, or as many believe, is it the ghost of the home's former master, Charles Sidney Dole? No one knows for sure, but what everyone agrees who has experienced paranormal activity is that there are no malicious spirits on the estate. And whether it is paranormal or not, there is a very positive, warm vibe throughout the building. And if there is anything there, it's all good. Have you ever visited Mike? And if so, did you have any experiences there? So that's it for this episode of Too Close to Home. We hope you've enjoyed. We would like to say a massive thank you to all of our Patreons, including Daniel, Alice, Christine, Justin, and Mike. Thank you to each and every one of you for not only supporting our show, but also allowing us to investigate and research the incredible stories from your area. We hope you've all enjoyed, and again, if you want us to dig up stories from your hometown, check out our Patreon for more information. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.